All right, we're back. Tell me you're joking time. The Pop Politico pod you've grown to, I'm not going to say love. I don't want to be too presumptuous here, but it may be intriguing enough that you keep coming back, which I am very thankful for, appreciative. If you wouldn't mind, because these things, technically it's free, but it takes blood, sweat, and tears to keep them coming. And when you send it to a friend and more people listen, it makes the blood, sweat, and tears feel a little less salty. So any kind of support you could provide in the form of spreading the word would be appreciated. That's my sales pitch PSA for the day. JB here, tell me you're joking. As you well know, I love music, and not surprisingly, I love my family too. And this time I'm playing a little tune from my oldest of three, living down there in Nash Vegas, Belmont student. They got a new band. It's called the Moguls, Moguls, right? Business and skiing combined with a little flair of the late 90s, early 2000s alt rock. I don't know where he got that influence from, but if you wouldn't mind, go give him a follow. Helps everybody out. Anyway, today we're going to be talking more politics because it is primary season. So in just a second, I'm going to be bringing on my guest. You've read your dashboard. You know who it is. I want to go back in time a little bit. We've really kind of been spraying the infield. We've got some really interesting conversations coming up soon, too, that are fun on the social media front. Really more of kind of like a marketing branding 101. So any of you that are wondering why is my stuff not relevant? Why is it not growing? Well, I'm bringing on some pros that have millions of followers and tons of engagement. So tips and tricks, not all politics. Like I said, this is the pop culture portion of the show, which we're going to roll out for you. So that being said, I want to go ahead and bring on the guest. As I mentioned, joining me today, not a newbie to politics, Miss Gina Mitten, running for State Senate District 4 in Missouri. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No problem. As I mentioned before we got on the air here, I wanted to have you go ahead and just kind of give a quick summary, kind of describe the district itself, because I think that's very important for where our conversation is likely going to go today, because virtually every single issue or policy position that you have from your page and or that is just relevant within the area, you have a district in which it runs the gamut. There's a massive spectrum of haves, have-nots, and everything in between. So can you just take a second and talk about the district? Where is it? What does it encompass? And, maybe just your own opinion. If you were to describe it, how would you describe it?
Okay, well, geographically, the furthest west boundary is Warson Woods, Manchester, and literally like one row of houses shy of Lindbergh. And then if you go to the northernmost boundary, it's this southwestern portion of the Wells Goodfellow neighborhood. The most eastern part is a little sliver of Tower Grove East, roughly like Connecticut, and I think, Connecticut Grand area. And then southeast would be Carondelet Park. So on the county side, it encompasses, again, those precincts in the Warson Woods area, all of Clayton, all of Richmond Heights, all of Maplewood, all of Shrewsbury. I'm missing something. Did I get Brentwood? So, yeah, Clayton, Brentwood, Richmond Heights, yeah. Maplewood, Shrewsbury, and Rock Hill. And then on the city side, again, I think it's all of the 4th Ward, all of the 5th Ward, all of the 2nd Ward, most of the 1st, and then the 6th, most of the 6th.
So a lot of political wonks speak in ward terms. Mm-hmm. Us normal folk deal in neighborhoods. So we're talking about the Hill, Francis Park, down through parts of Tower Grove, Carondelet, Southampton, correct?
Southampton, Northampton, St. Louis Hills, Holly Hills.
And then moving up through Shaw into
Skinker to Bolivar.
Yep.
the Lindell along, the big houses along Lindell along the park, and then the West End, and again in parts of Wells, Goodfellow. That's the northernmost neighborhoods.
So then I think most listeners would be like, okay, that is a broad, that's a big spectrum, because for example, on Lindell alone, you've got, I know there's a $10 million house there, and if you go a couple blocks north, you've got $15,000 teardowns.
Yep.
And everything in between. Not to mention, as you go west, that gets a little even crazier in the have column, versus the have not column. So the second part of my question that I asked you earlier, as far as describing the district, given all of those factors, if you were to try and explain to an outsider kind of who your potential constituent is as a generic constituent, how do you describe the district through that lens?
Well, I don't know that there is such a thing necessarily as a generic constituent, but again, it runs the gamut from multi-millionaires to folks that are barely surviving. I mean, financially and socioeconomically, that's the makeup.
Well, I mean, that's the reality of it. But we're in Missouri. Mm-hmm. I think we could reasonably agree that you get outside of city limits, there is a generic description of the constituent in the state of Missouri based upon elections, numbers, and results. We would be a conservative Christian MAGA land, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, this is a 70% Democratic district, and I think, and again, it's going to include what I would say maybe the old school Democrats, folks like Fred Wessels, for instance, who's an old school South St. Louis guy, to, again, folks that support Cori Bush. Or, it runs the political gamut.
So I also mentioned in the intro that you are not new to politics. Can you just take a second and give a little bit of your pathway resume as it pertains to being an elected official? Go ahead.
Look, my first door knock was before I was old enough to vote, when I knocked for Jimmy Carter in 1980. My first political protest was in the early 80s after Ronald Reagan fired the air traffic controller. So I spent a lot of time in sort of activism, that kind of area, for many, many, many years. And when it started to flip was, frankly, in the late 90s, when my husband joined our local school board. And it sort of, you start to think about, wait a minute, I can convert this into policy making.
Which school board?
It was the Maplewood-Richmond Heights School Board. And at the time he joined, that district was 1 point away of losing accreditation.
Okay, so you personally, within the district, to put a pin in the map, you're a resident of?
Richmond Heights, like 3 blocks west of the St. Louis city limit.
Okay. So you've been active, knocking doors, protesting, doing all those things that a good little democratic American does, especially during those years. But at what point did you make the conversion from being an advocate to an actual political candidate?
There was an opening in the Richmond Heights City Council, so I moved into that. I was still in law school at the time, and worked. I was on that city council for 8 years, and then my state house seat opened up, and due to redistricting in 2012, and the rest, as they say, is history. So I served what used to be the 83rd district, that went from The Hill here in the city to Rock Hill in the county, and I was term limited at the end of 2020.
Okay, so 4 terms, 2-year terms, right?
Yep.
As a House rep. Can you take a second and talk a little bit about, maybe, because you witnessed the transition, Missouri historically, from a pop culture standpoint, when it comes to politics, was a, quote, bellwether.
Yeah.
We were a purple state forever.
Yeah.
And then along comes Barack Obama and that election in particular. And that's the first time in, 50, 60, 70 years, whatever it was, in which we did not agree with the national temperature. Take a second and talk about, your own perception at that time, maybe if you can recollect, as to how you felt, in so much that the state that you've grown up in, that you love, that you're representing, was the contrarian.
Right.
with the introduction of Barack Obama as the president?
Well, I mean, I think that sort of progressive change from purple to red started earlier than that in the early 2000s when Republicans took over the state House and the state Senate. As of 2008, obviously, that was sort of the beginning of a broader or more conservative movement, as far as that's from my perspective. So, I mean, I remember when President Obama was elected, I knocked doors for him. I was certainly involved as an advocate at that point in life. And, his election was obviously a giant moment for our country. But here in Missouri, I think that it inflamed some folks, and then we see the Tea Party, the rise of the Tea Party, and then from there, in 2012 we still elected Jay Nixon as our governor. We still had statewide that were Democrats, and since 2016, though, once Trump came in, sort of the coffin has been sealed to some extent.
So, without creating a multi-part podcast, what would you say was maybe the main one or two points or the impetus behind that shift from kind of purple kingdom to not anymore, we're going to go red?
Well, I think it's a lot of things, but personally, I think we elected a man of color, and that angered a whole lot of folks here in the state of Missouri. It's as disappointing and frustrating to me as it gets, but I do believe that was a big part of it. And it's not just Missouri, I think it was the country. Again, we see the Tea Party then starting to come around in 2010, and I mean, we all seen the horrible memes. We've all seen, the president being depicted as an ape. That's a big shift from my perspective as to how we do things.
So let's go back maybe 8 years or so to roughly 2000, because as you pointed out, there was already a shift that occurred prior to Barack coming on to the stage. The House and the Senate in the state had already gone red. And was picking up even more momentum with every election. Forget about the racist reality of Barack Obama and what it did to the headline, so to speak. You were feet on the ground. Why do you think we were shifting that way prior?
There's a lot of reasons for it. I think that the party became more progressive. There was less, I think that our tent shifted to some extent, and so that a lot of rural and more conservative Democrats didn't feel welcome. I think that's one of the big things. And listen, Catherine Hanaway, she had a whole lot to do with that shift. She, I think, started employing strategies and metrics and measurements to make sure that her party started to get control, and she was successful at that.
Let's put a mirror in front of this kind of initial segment in which we're discussing. At the end of the day, elections are a competition between two individuals come November. No matter what the fundamental reasons were or who was pulling the strings, it came down to a game, a winner and a loser. At what point, in hindsight, should Democrats take responsibility for the losses? And in Missouri in particular, we saw an acceleration. We've seen an acceleration not only from 2000 to 2008, but really from 2000 all the way up until effectively today. That's 26 years of the same polling places, the same people, the same families, the same houses, et cetera, but you're seeing an acceleration away from the Democratic Party in Missouri. What is the Democratic Party's role in that trajectory?
Well, again, I think that our tent shrunk to some extent. And to tell you the truth, if I were to just pinpoint it to one thing, I think that we shifted from our general focus upon working folks, upon folks that live paycheck to paycheck, upon union folks, and went more in, like a college degree somehow becomes the measure of intelligence, something as a high school dropout I deeply disagree with. And the focus became on white-collar jobs, which, does raise someone's living, but we left the working class along that way. And then there's obviously social issues that come with that.
Go back in time then. knowing what you know now, it's kind of like a Rod Stewart song, right? One area, one policy, one message. What would you shift? What would you go back and say, stop? We can't do X, or we should do Y in order to maintain kind of the more pragmatic tint process.
I think that the biggest issue is we stopped paying attention to the real kitchen table issues of the working class. President Clinton was actually, it's the economy, stupid. And that to me, right, but that to me was a big turning point. Clinton won, and granted, he was also a more conservative Democrat in retrospect. At the time, I would say that a lot of folks, Democrats didn't see it that way necessarily. But then, we end up in 2000 with W. And the parties kind of, I would say since 2000, we've in some ways arguably shifted our perspectives to the extent that Democrats are now seen as the elites. When I was growing up, the Republicans were the elites. Mm-hmm. And now it seems to be kind of the opposite, and Donald Trump obviously has a whole lot to do with that. But the Tea Party was the start of that, is, hey, you guys aren't paying attention to our kitchen table, our issues. It's the economy, stupid. And since then, I think that it's just gone further and further. My hope, obviously, is that Democrats can start to recapture those interests and those constituencies and pay attention to that.
So how do you true that up then with some of the national Democratic policies, or I should not say policies, language that is coming out from, well, let me qualify this. It's no secret that the Democratic Party is having a civil war from a national perspective between Democratic Socialists to neocons that are on the blue team now, and everything in between. But you just mentioned multiple times here kitchen table issues, which you and I both know, being in the weeds. Mm-hmm. In this, it's the economy. It's paying your bills. It's it's getting your kids into school. It's healthcare. It's food. It's all of that.
Right.
But we still see segments of the Democratic Party, specifically further and further on the left, eating up a lot of time and energy when it comes to moral social issues. Defending trans rights, or take your pick, anything that is not the economy, mm-hmm. With fervor. Do you think that is a good idea? And is that a winning strategy? Since you kind of pointed out, we got 26 years worth of receipts to show that forgetting about the working class and ignoring kitchen table issues has resulted in this shift. Where are you ideologically in balancing social issues, moral issues, versus let's just win and focus on the economy?
Honestly, I think that that's district by district to a large extent, and that's part of when I say I think that our tent got smaller. That's one of my concerns. So we can see folks that someone might. I don't like the labels, honestly. I really, but we have seen in primaries in significantly or overwhelmingly Democratic areas, we've seen, yes, Democratic Socialists be elected in those primaries. But where my concern is what are we doing, again, to focus on the economic issues in the more rural areas, in the more conservative areas? And will the party as a whole be willing to open up to a candidate that might not agree on some of these social issues?
Isn't that one of the realities of your district, though, in so much that, for example, economic issues, let's just say healthcare, right, or housing affordability, is there any difference between the need for a Warson Woods recent grad versus a high school graduate coming out of the Wells Goodfellow neighborhood?
You mean, is there any daylight between?
Well, because you're kind of alluding to the fact that a lot of these moral issues or these social issues, so to speak, tend to gravitate and live within a more urban environment, mm-hmm, because
highly democratic,
and the rural area is more focused on the economy. Don't you think that's kind of the exact bear trap that many Democrats have been walking into, in so much that it's actually the economy in every one of these demos as the number one issue?
Is the economy a thread throughout? Absolutely. And that's the thing. Again, I'm in a Democratic primary. So one of those differences in a Democratic primary in a wholly Democratic area, I mean, if memory serves, this district voted 70% for the Democratic candidate, Crystal Quaid, for governor in 2024. Of course, the economy is a common thread throughout. I agree completely. But in some areas, the difference between two Democrats can be social issues, in my case, such as abortion. But in Pike County, those social issues can also come to play in a Democrat versus Republican. And what I'm suggesting is that I think that in some areas we need to be open to letting a Democratic candidate focus on the economy, perhaps to the exclusion of some of the social issues that I certainly care deeply about. But you can't move the needle if you're not in office.
Yeah. No, well, bingo. This has always been my argument, commentary in all these postmortems. I mean, look, if anybody owns the licensing rights to postmortem, it's the Democratic Party in Missouri. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. You just mentioned, let's start moving into some of these topics. Abortion access, pro-life, bans, amendments, etc. There's a million different directions and positions when it comes to this particular topic in Missouri at large, but obviously, in our district as well. Just take a second from a campaign standpoint. Your stump on abortion, on the amendment that's at hand, Amendment 3, for the second time. Where are you on that?
Well, I am unequivocally supportive of reproductive rights or of abortion rights. I always have been, always will be. And listen, as I said, I am a high school dropout. Ultimately, I started working full-time when I was 15 years old. And I went to night school after I got my GED at 16. And I ultimately became a lawyer after a scholarship from WashU Law School. In the middle of all that, I had a child out of wedlock. That was my choice. I was broke as a joke. I was a single mom. And I would probably do the same thing again if I was that same 24-year-old. However, it is not my place, and it sure as heck in my mind is not the government's place to tell anybody else how to handle that in their own situation. I have a 20-something daughter that lives in this district, and I don't want her or anybody of childbearing age to be represented by a Democrat that doesn't wholly respect their right to choose their reproductive destiny.
So there's a lot of different layers to that. The first one, the top one, I'm going to start more statewide. In that strategy, as you and I both agree, if you don't win an election, it doesn't matter what your position is.
Right.
Okay, so number one, we all agree that the Republicans have been winning these elections. By winning so many elections, that put them in a position in which they could put legislation on the floor to go down the path, especially once Roe was overturned nationally, to be able to become even more militant against that. Missouri, and starting really in the late 90s, single-issue voters became all the rage. Mm-hmm. And in our state, pro-life did not matter about these economic issues that we're now talking about. Voters would go to the poll, and the only thing they would look for is a position on abortion.
Yep.
And they went right.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Do you think that the Democratic strategy to take the position of pro-abortion no matter what, and be super militant on explaining that position, do you think it was a little bit, while it might be morally right, do you think it was a little bit tone deaf if we're looking at it purely through the lens of how do we win an election?
Do I think it was a little bit what?
We know that Missouri has a large percentage of single-issue voters.
Right.
And the single issue for them is pro-life.
Yes, absolutely. It's abortion rights.
Therefore, elevating that particular issue in a pro-choice, pro-abortion narrative, it was welcoming the battle.
Arguably. But here's the thing. I think that you could be a pro-choice candidate if you can. I still think that those needles can be moved. for instance, I mean, Jefferson County is a great example where we had both some pro-choice and some anti-choice Democrats in my first term in 2012 in the House. And but all of them were supportive of gun rights and labor rights. Now, in 2014, that shifted. In other words, the party of Jay Nixon from Jefferson County was no more. But Governor Nixon, supported reproductive rights. He supported abortion rights and was elected handily in 2012. So again, I think that the focus needs to be on the economy. And are you going to bring everybody in for that? No. If they're still going to be single-issue voters, they're going to be single-issue voters. However, I think that in more conservative areas, I personally I would never be okay supporting somebody that is no abortion ever at all, that supports a ban. That just, it kills people, literally. But to somebody that might have a little more nuanced view of it, yeah, I think that could help. But again, I'm running in Senate 4, where 80% of the constituency voted in favor of Amendment 3. That's not, for me, an issue.
So Amendment 3, this is now after I had your opponent on, there were a couple people who shall remain nameless that reached out that were kind of giving me a little bit of insight. And then whenever I let them know that your camp had reached out to come on too, they gave me a little bit more insight as to what was going on. Your take, the attack on Mr. Butts, is that he was a no vote.
Well, no, he's been yes, and he's been present, and he's been no on the same language more than once. It's a consistent pattern. So where does he stand?
So my understanding, and in speaking with him, was that the perfection vote was a yes. I believe?
Yes, it was.
Correct, and that was in the total ban. Now, inside politics, inside baseball, right? And you know how Missouri works. There's a lot of give and take, etc.
Sure.
And it wasn't him telling me this. This is somebody that was there. It was like, no, we were told there was going to be changes that were going to be made on the Senate side. That didn't happen. It came back. At the end of the day, he was a no vote on it.
Correct.
And then the Amendment 3, he advocated in favor of it, right, to protect
the will of the voters.
He was pro-choice. And then he states unequivocally that he himself is pro-choice. So how do you view that? How do you true that up?
Well, first of all, he might state unequivocally that he's pro-choice this week, but in April and May of this year, on video, in forums, he has said unequivocally, I'm pro-life, but not just pro-birth. So, I mean, that doesn't add up. I'm sorry, the math just doesn't add up. If that's what
don't shoot the messenger.
I get it. I'm just saying.
Like my job here is to make sure if we're going to, because at the end of the day, to a degree, I just need to see more Democrats win bigger elections.
I get it. I agree with that.
So therefore, I want to make sure that we don't do the same thing MAGA does, in which we chase parts of it.
I agree.
So
I agree. I'm not a DSA. You know what I'm saying? I get asked all the time if I'm a member of DSA. I'm like, no, I've never been to a meeting. I don't, do I have friends that are in DSA? Sure. Again, I have been endorsed by far left groups as well as the likes of Jim Shrewsbury or Fred Wessels, who are pro-life Democrats. They've been pretty clear about that. My beef with Representative Butts, though, is that he's not a consistent vote. And again, you can go into all the weeds of, well, it was supposed to get changed in the Senate. Well, first of all, that is a risk. You never know. The Senate might pick up that bill and just pass it itself, and it's a done deal. And at the end of the day, if you vote yes on a bill that you're not okay with going to the governor, you've made a mistake as far as I'm concerned.
Totally understand. And politics is a gamble for a lot, especially for younger elected officials, freshmen, newbies that don't have sway. So, but can we agree at the end of the day he was a no vote, and that he did support Amendment 3, so that we're at least on level set
for those two bills? Yes, he supported. He did not support the overturning of Amendment 3, and he did ultimately vote no on the trigger ban in 2019. At the time, I mean, he has said that he has said on video that he voted no because it didn't have exceptions for rape, incest, and the serious health of the mother. I'm not sure what that definition is, but I know that legally and statutorily it's a very, very, very difficult needle to thread. We've seen in other states serious health is basically on your deathbed or dead. And since then, in 2025, he voted yes on a bill that would have criminalized physicians for performing health care, and as well as open the door for civil penalties.
So I don't know which bill this was. Did the bill pass that he voted on?
He voted yes on the bill in 2025. It did not make it across the finish line. In 2026, in early 26, he voted present on the same bill. Exact same bill. No changes in the language at all. And what had changed between that time? Well, he had a pro-choice candidate running against him for this seat. And then at the end of session, and I think it was May of 2025, it might have been the very final, of 2026, and it might have been the final week, he did vote no. Now, the bill had changed a lot between his present vote in early spring of 26 and his no vote in May. But when you vote yes, no, and present on the exact same bill, or for the most part, the exact same bill, the one that he voted no on did go farther than the one that he had voted yes and present on. It's a problem.
No,
it's a problem.
I get it. I mean, this is another one of those things where we can get in the weeds of process. Let's move on. Next topic, because there's plenty. The other area that it seems as if there's a clear dividing line between the two candidates is law and order, police, crime, etc. Why don't you start with kind of the stump on crime as it pertains to the district and where you're at, and then we can tie in his position, city, county, et cetera.
I mean, it's crime an issue. Yes, it is, although it has been declining here in the city, or maybe in the region. I know for sure in the city over the last few years at least. I've been a victim of crime. I've been burgled. I've had my car stolen. My cars have been ransacked more times than I can count. So it's not just a city issue. It's a city and a county issue. I know I got a sister that's lived in the city for 30 years, and she's never had any of those things happen. My daughter was a victim of a home invasion last year, and there's nothing more fun than waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning to a man in your bedroom saying, "Get the F out of bed." And I have another family member that was kidnapped and sexually assaulted. This was several years ago, but it's not that I'm not aware of crime and don't have personal experience with crime victims. I don't see the state takeover of the police or it's really a hostile takeover as far as I'm concerned by a Republican governor. Why is that a zero-sum game? Why are the only two choices to either have the mayor in complete control, which caused the police to have some heartburn, and understandably so. I'm not suggesting that the officers here in the city didn't have legitimate gripes. They do. Or a hostile takeover by a Republican government. I don't understand. There are other ways to govern a police department. There are other ways to govern anything, frankly. And the idea that it was an if-then, there is a binary choice, I'm not okay with. The timing was absolutely terrible. Mayor Spencer should have had an opportunity to work with the police department.
So anecdotally, I mean, I've been around the area my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to guesstimate, I probably know between 20 and 25 cops in the city of St. Louis.
Sure.
Long-term, short-term, newbies, oldies. 90% wanted this to happen.
Yeah.
As employees, they wanted their new boss to not be the city of St. Louis.
Right.
Fundamentally, from a democratic standpoint, from a representation standpoint, from a local perspective, I personally was opposed to the state takeover on those grounds. But I can understand threading that needle, using your terminology here. This is what the people that are in the streets doing the work wanted. How do you address that reality through your campaign and your own position?
Well, let's go to the Rolling Stones. You can't always get what you want, but if you try and get what you need. So again, if the issue was the mayor having complete control, then let's find a compromise, something that's between these two extremes. But that didn't happen.
Well, to be fair, I don't think it was an issue about Kara Spencer and the mayor having control. I think what that was, their position, as they explained to me at the corner of the pub, talking for hours and hours and hours, this is a culminating event. This is not just an election cycle. This is years/decades of the directionality that they were not happy with.
Well, decades, it was only 1 decade and a half because this change only happened in 2013.
You know what I'm saying, though.
I do know what you're saying. And again, and when that change happened, they went through Mayor Slay, Mayor Cruson, Mayor Jones. So I mean, I get, again, I'm not suggesting that the police didn't have legitimate beefs. What I'm suggesting, though, is that the only option is not to have a complete takeover where, to the extent of the chaos that we're seeing now, financial chaos, and just voters are not happy. Even voters that are very, very supportive of the police aren't happy with this. They're not happy with sort of the greed, and they have deep concerns. I get asked regularly about police surveillance, or St. Louis City Police Department could start working with ICE tomorrow, and I would almost guarantee you that if it went to the voters would say, no, we do not want our police department cooperating with the federal government.
Can't we live in a binary world, though, where both can be true in so much that, yes, I agree with you, that if there was some type of a movement in which ICE shows up and there's this macro participation and cooperation, that would not go over well on top of the already removal of local control to the state level. But at the same time, when you take those specific debates out of the conversation and you go to just normal people who are asking about, how are you on crime? Do you feel safe? Can you go downtown? Do you lock your car at night? Have you lost windows? All that stuff. That's really not declining. Now, that being said, I'm not afraid of the city. I'm in the city all the time.
Me too.
But perception is reality.
Yeah.
And that perception has equated to a domino effect of issues as it pertains to keeping people in the city, keeping jobs in the city.
Right.
Just take a look at some of the mobility of businesses from TV, radio, et cetera, that were downtown that are now over off of 40 and moving further west.
For sure.
Like
law firms.
We're seeing a direct correlation between perception of crime and physical mobility of dollars. So how do we bring those two together without making this an absolute either state control or local control issue? Because there's a ton of nuance. How do you view the nuance and approach it?
Well, there was crime in the city before the local control and after local control. And if a state board run by the governor addressed the reality, not the perception, but the reality of crime, Kansas City would not. I mean, Kansas City decided to stick with with state control. Their numbers are not great. They're not hiring new officers. They have the exact same issues that we have, with the exception of officer morale. At least from what I know, I don't live in Kansas City. I can't speak to officer morale there, but that's it didn't change the stats in Kansas City. So the expectation that it's going to change the stats here, I think, is short-sighted at best. Now, the perception is a whole different thing. That perception was in place long before there was local control of the police department.
Can you take a second then and let's add another layer to this, because there's the historical reality of what occurred here in 2014 in particular after the Michael Brown shooting, and you had this. We were ground zero for the rise of defund the police. Again, those cops that I talked about sitting and talking with over the past 12 years since that happened, that narrative alone made them feel completely devalued.
Yes.
They were competing with a narrative, a movement, and specifically elected officials that were their bosses in City Hall and around the aldermanic neighborhoods, right? In which that was occurring.
Right.
So my question to you is, what role do you see the post-Ferguson landscape playing in this issue, as far as maybe increasing the divide, And well, let's just start there. I don't want to add too many
I mean,
questions.
no, I do think obviously that was a culminating moment, and it changed not just locally but nationally, and I think in a lot of ways. I am not in favor of defunding the police. I never have been. That's not been my position. I don't like the phrase. I can understand that folks believe that by saying that it got folks to pay attention, but I think that it has hurt things more than it has helped, just that phrase.
So how do you approach it then? Because again, in a cursory just review, because I told you at the beginning of this, I don't do a lot of research. I try to learn on the fly. There are people that are close to your campaign, some people that have endorsed you, et cetera, that are woven into the fabric of defund the police.
Correct.
How do you differentiate yourself from them? Because that narrative, it's not dead. It's still here. There are still claims and demands to want to go that route. What makes you different from the people that are endorsing you, that you have that you're kind of partnering with politically when it comes to this issue?
I've also been endorsed by Tim Murphy, who was a St. Louis City police officer rising to lieutenant for 35 years. So I mean, it's not one or the other. I have a spectrum of support that goes from police officers to defunders, and I think that's a good thing, frankly. I think that having a coalition like that shows that I have the skill set, so to speak, to compromise and to work with groups that are very, very much on different sides of an issue.
So let me ask you then, and the only reason let me go back on this for just a second. The only reason I ask for clarity is because the average voter doesn't do their homework.
Oh, yeah, right.
They can't differentiate between the two.
Right.
So if they see a post from Megan Green, for example, supporting you, there's a perception.
They assume that I am aligned with the President Green on everything, and that's just not the case.
So let me ask, because I have an opinion on this matter. Not that you care, not that the listener cares, but I want to get your take on this because you, as a lawyer, I think you will view. I guarantee you've thought about this. When you think about the issues St. Louis has when it comes to law and order and crime and everything else, there is the on-the-ground reality of the things that occur with cops and engagement and good shootings, bad shootings, all this stuff that resulted in kind of the defund the police narrative. There's all that things that garners the headlines. But then there's the reality of the legal system as that event, whatever that micro event, macro event is, it moves into the courts. And in our backyard, Kim Gardner, for all those years, that was her baby. And she was tied to the movement. And so therefore, we saw a flood of individuals, just call a spade, that did really bad things.
Yes.
That went into the system for a day and were out the next day.
I agree.
And continued to do bad things.
Yep.
How do you address that when it comes to root cause? Right? Because again, there's a bifurcated reality when it comes to law and order. Where are you on the court's responsibility in helping the police?
Oh, yeah.
Keep people.
I mean, and that was the issue with Kim Gardner, as far as I'm concerned, is that the courts can't do anything if the case is not brought. And the courts also have a responsibility to follow the law, meaning, you know, if the prosecutor's office doesn't show up, they've got to dismiss the case. I mean, that's just the law. It is the way that it is. So, do I think that Kim Gardner did a good job? No, I do not think that she did a good job. I think that Gabe Gore seems to be doing a pretty good job, and has definitely gotten cases moving again, making sure that there's lawyers in there. I mean, the exodus of attorneys under Kim Gardner was just a giant red flag, I think, and that wasn't immediate, but within a year or so, it was not good. But again, the courts can only rule or decide with the evidence that's presented. And if you've got a prosecutor that's basically not going to prosecute, it's an issue. And so what is the court's role? I think a judge has to apply the law. Even you could have we have conservative judges down in the city of St. Louis that are running criminal dockets, and more left-leaning judges running criminal dockets. So they have to make their decisions according to the law and not necessarily, we're supposed to be as unbiased as possible.
Yeah, super simple, right? We just solved the problem. Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum, and that being education. That's another key area within your campaign.
Right.
I'm gonna broken record here. Stump me on your education position.
So I am. Listen, charter schools have been in the city for a long time. I'm still not a fan of them. I have friends and family that have, well, actually not family, but I have friends that have used the charter school system and been very happy with it. I have family who has used the public school system and been happy with it. My beef about charter schools and the defunding of traditional public schools for charters, they don't play by the same rules. And unless and until they're playing by the same rules, I'm going to oppose them. And the reason is that a charter school, first of all, we just saw this year, or in 2026, a charter school just close. A traditional public school could never do that. And think about the families and the impact upon those folks. They went through all the bother, and it is a bother to apply and get accepted. They have to do their own transportation, et cetera, to get into the charter school. And then boom, one day, oh, yeah, by the way, your kid doesn't have a place to go to school next week. That's not okay. It's just not okay. They don't have to accept all students, and they routinely deny admission to students with physical or developmental or cognitive disabilities. That's another problem. So, I mean, it just takes common sense from my perspective to look at the sort of the bucket we have of students. And low-income students, study after study after study says that it takes more to educate. And it's not because these people are not intelligent or stupid. That's not it at all, or their race even. It's because they've got adverse childhood experiences, and they often have parents that are working 2 jobs and just don't have the time to read at night. You know, Parents as Teachers is an organization that tries to help educate young parents on how to deal with that. So if you've got a charter school system and then add the private school vouchers to just exacerbate it all, what you end up with is sort of the higher performing students are going to go to these other places. They tend to have educated parents. They have parents that are able to navigate the system.
Sure.
And then what's left? What's left are the students that need extra help. And I'm not suggesting that we dumb down tests or anything like that. I think that an expectation of excellence and quality is an important piece of education. But what they do need and deserve are the wraparound services, the tutoring, the after-school programs, all of that other stuff. And I say this against the backdrop of, again, my husband joined Maplewood Richmond Heights when it was 1 point away of losing accreditation. They went to DESE in a road trip in 1999 to say, we're not sure we're going to be able to survive. And DESE said, well, yeah, I'll better figure it out. And lo and behold, we did. That school district scored the highest APR in the state this year.
So let me a lot to unpack there. Let's just start with St. Louis Public Schools, specifically from a 10,000-foot view. And I'm going to piggyback this on top of the population reality, post 1950, or whatever the year was in which we peaked at 900 plus. We are now sitting at 270, give or take. And in historian after historian and the Ness Sandovals of the world, we can look at why that's happened. It's 2 reasons: it's crime and it's education, schools. And at first, it was white flight, in which people were, you call it what it is. They
Racism.
were afraid of,
yeah,
exactly. But what has happened is we're seeing all flight. It doesn't matter. It's not the white flight predominantly anymore. It's just people are leaving because they cannot keep their kids in these school districts, and they are afraid something bad would happen within the neighborhood, et cetera, from a crime perspective. We're talking 50 plus years, right, of trend. The question is really simple, and I'm not a pro school choice guy at all. I personally, just full transparency, I live in Webster. I sent my oldest to SLU High. My kids went to some private schools in elementary, and then they've done public school, and I've got one in Webster High. I spray the infield,
right? Yeah.
Right, but I also have the ability to choose. Like school choice for me it's an economic one, and I can make that choice. All of that being said, the argument, for school choice in St. Louis in particular, data after data after data shows whatever decisions had been being made over generations, they aren't working. So how do you speak to the person that's like, What is going to be different? Show me what's going to be different, because the spend per kid, City of St. Louis Public Schools, it's above a lot.
Right.
The almost every district that's in every school district that's in your
county.
Senate in your Senate district. So those districts are spending less per kid and getting significantly higher output. Why shouldn't there be that kind of change?
Well, first of all, I don't think that it's an apples to oranges comparison. Again, when you say they're spending less per kid in the county areas, look at Clayton, for instance. The median income, I'm sure, is twice. I mean, I don't know. I might not be sure, but I think that we can all reasonably agree it's going to be a heck of a lot more than the median income here in the city. And those kids, I mean, my husband used to call Clayton sort of it's an idiot-proof district, just because the kids come from wealthy middle and upper middle class families that are highly educated. These are kids that have been read to every morning since the day they were born. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, though. That's my first issue. But when you say, I mean, listen, if you're a family, say you're a 35-year-old family that's got two kids that are about to enter elementary school, what do? I agree. That's a challenge. I'm not suggesting that SLPS is doing great work, but I keep coming back to the statistical reality that now, when you say the price per student, that also includes all of the high-level schools that SLPS has, Metro, McKinley, the gifted programs, the magnet programs, so to speak.
And I've done a nerdy dive on it too, and the reality is, if you really get into the weeds of it, so much of the money is spent on maintenance, overhead of the buildings, and you have this push and pull in which, you go back to the population. I brought that up at the onset, because that reality is part of the reason why the spend is so inefficient, because it's political suicide in some neighborhoods to even mention the potential of closing down a school.
Right.
And yet we have a footprint in which it just doesn't make sense to keep them open.
Right. And I listen, I appreciate the fact that SLPS is now looking into that. I hope that they are going to listen to the constituents. I think that it's going to be a hard needle to thread, and there's going to be people that are unhappy with it. It's just the nature of the beast. But I agree that having to economize the buildings and building maintenance is a crucial step. And you know what? It's something that we did in Maplewood Richmond Heights. We had two old buildings, a middle school and one of the two elementary schools, and they ended up being raised. I'm not happy about it. Was it the thing that I wanted to have happen? No, but we built one new elementary school, and it's a modern building, and the maintenance it's a huge difference in your budget. And when we rehabbed, for the middle school students, ended up going to the high school, because we had a huge high school from when population was very high. I mean, that's happening all over the city, all over the country, frankly.
Yeah, and I'm not aloof to the apples and oranges reality of a Clayton school district in the city of St. Louis, in so much that, the Clayton kids are getting 3, 4, 5 meals a day. They are being read to. Everything else makes it easier for them to go learn. That being said, the St. Louis Public Schools is part and parcel with the leadership of the city of St. Louis, in which all the other things, that Clayton has, i.e. jobs, significantly higher median income, more services, grocery stores, right?
Right. Yeah.
It has all those things. So therefore, St. Louis Public Schools, unfortunately for the kids that are involved, their struggle is a byproduct of significantly larger failures in the broader community.
I agree.
So therefore, going back to the charter school, I want to push back on. I agree that it's completely bullshit for them to laser out kids that maybe have physical disabilities or other types of needs, because they can, right? That's wrong. At the same time, that means that the kids that are on there that are probably just good kids trying to learn, and on par, they're doing well. They're doing better than they would have been doing in SLPS. So where's the middle ground? Because as much as it's not fair to the kids with needs and disabilities, it clearly is fair and beneficial for those that are just the normal kids that are not going to be in SLPS. How do you speak to that family and tell them your decision, while good for your kid, it's not good for all of us, right? Because that's kind of what it is.
I don't know that. Let me put it this way: I have experienced that myself. For the reason why we got involved in our local school district is because my son went to Washington Montessori as part of the magnet program, and we had a great experience for 3 years. In the fourth year, we had no teacher. Went through substitutes. It's a long story. So then we were in the same boat that a lot of city folks are. Are we going to be private school poor? Are we going to be moved to a different school district and mortgage poor, or are we going to make a difference? And that was our choice. And in a small school district, I think that it's obviously easier to do. I have concerns about the election process for the boards here in St. Louis Public Schools. It's been odd for decades upon decades. So there were times, though, early on in that transition of our local school district where my husband and I were very concerned. Like, am I sacrificing my child's education for my political beliefs? And that's a tough row to hoe. I understand. I really do, and I've been there. We decided...
That's why most people went mobile.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. But I understand, and we decided to stick it out, and it worked out very well. You know, my kid ended up going to college, and it was fine. But it was very, very dicey for several years for us. So again, charter schools are here. They're not going to go anywhere. I don't have any expectation that in the next 8 years, if I'm in the Senate, that all of a sudden charter schools are going to disappear and the families aren't going to have those options. What my beef is, though, is to say that charters are the only way, or let's expand that. And all that it's going to do is we're going to end up with an SLPS that has only the most difficult kids, only the kids with IEPs, only the kids with physical issues, only the kids with disciplinary issues. And it's an impossible. The statistics are never going to bear out if that's what you're working with.
So then let's just take a second. Then let's assume that you win this primary and you move on. And if you were to tackle this particular issue, give me the idea of how you address it, or go, or tackle it, or in so much that take charter schools out of the conversation. Forget about funding. Forget about shifting of dollars, fair, unfair, and everything in between. Specifically, St. Louis Public Schools. Give me 1 or 2 bullet points as to how you start to flip the script there.
Well, again, I think that SLPS is already doing one of the first things we already talked about is to try and economize the maintenance and building issues, because that drains dollars out of the classroom. It's that simple, and math is the math. I think that the other thing would be to, again, try and further the supports. What are we doing about free and reduced lunch? Federal government is now pulling those dollars. How do we handle that as a state? Are we still okay with kids with the expectation that kids who are hungry learn? The expectation that kids who have slept in a car or on the sidewalk learn? I think there are also creative ways to deal with that. Again, MRH is a small school district. We got some seed money, I don't know, it's probably close 15, 20 years ago. And we started the only home for homeless students in the country, and it still exists today. It's called Joe's Place. We unfortunately never had the ability to get a Jane's Place as well, so it is only for young men. But we had kids that were sleeping in houses that where meth was being cooked.
Yep.
And they need, it's a very small and incremental thing, but that's, I think, how it works. It's the small and incremental changes that ultimately turns things around.
Yeah, it's funny because it's one of those things, and this is where I'll calling balls and strikes, the hypocrisy. Like Democrats have been told, don't tell somebody that they're voting against their best interest, right?
Right.
When it comes to rural people that lean far right, that are poor.
Right.
Struggling. It's the same thing with St. Louis Public School Board. We can see the exact same trajectory. It's the same argument. Anyway,
right.
I digress.
Right.
One thing I want to talk to you about, which I think is really kind of an overlay, literally and figuratively, on crime, education, all these things, infrastructure, and that is city-county. Where are you on city-county?
Well, I've said it before. I did not think that better together was better or together. I did not support that. In fact, I filed a bill that basically forced a statewide vote to consolidate counties that had low residency rates. The rural people did not like that. And I thought, wait a minute. If the good folks of Pike County, for instance, get to vote on whether the city and the county merge, why shouldn't the good folks of St. Louis City and County be able to vote on whether some rural counties merge. And it was really just, it was obviously just to sort of point out an issue. I think that if the folks of St. Louis City and St. Louis County want to merge, and I think that the first step would obviously be to have the county absorb the city as a municipality, I'm all for it. I mean, I'm all for what the voters
Yeah, well, this is one thing. Full transparency. I am city-county merge all day long. Yesterday,
Right.
20 years ago, fix this shit.
Right.
This great divorce is a great big headache.
Yes.
Therefore, I want to get that out of the way. Let's take the voters out. I'm just asking you, as somebody that is aware of how things work.
Right.
Should it? How does what would you? Where would you start? Make this an authoritarian kingdom for a day.
Right.
What do you do with the city?
If I had the magic wand, yes, I would put the city as a municipality, or a city within the St. Louis County. Again, it changes all this. First and foremost, even if nothing else changed, it changes all the statistics and all that perception issue. I mean, that's an immediate impact. And everybody could have the exact same governance. Now, that's not even addressing again, I think you go further than that. I know that, Representative Butts has talked a lot about the fact that city and county can't get along, or the 911 center, and those are important issues. I agree. And I think that once that absorption happens, it becomes an opening to start to really dig into the weeds of how to further cooperation and further economies of scale. I'm the only candidate in this race that has ever participated in a study of a merger. And granted, it's the fiefdoms in the county. It was Richmond Heights and Clayton did a merger study. We had the Brookings Institute come in and talk to us. It was like 2004, 2005, so not that long after the Louisville marriage occurred. So I get it. And here's the funny thing, is what ultimately killed that was pension plans for public safety workers. And in retrospect, here we are 20 years later. If we had embarked upon it then, we'd be done by now. Right. And that's one of just the unfortunate things, that I think that the political will just wasn't there at the time. I was not interested in folding up. I felt that we should pursue it, although I honestly never thought that Clayton was the best match. I think that Maplewood and Richmond Heights should merge because the schools, we have more in common. But it's a hard thing to talk about those. It's a lot of work, let's put it that way. But do I think that the county should absorb the city as its own city within the county? Yeah, I would vote for that, just if that was the minimum.
So let's move on to day two, if that were to be the case, because like you said, and I completely agree, and I've seen the numbers. The number one result of just simply reintegrating would be the statistics. We go from being competing with Detroit and Baltimore for violent cities to milquetoast 48, 49, 50.
Exactly.
Businesses care about that.
Yes, they do.
All of that, the optics, and it wouldn't reduce murders or crime, but it would make the optics different. So let's get to some of the brass tacks. If there were to be a merger, because within the Better Together conversation, there was points that we're looking at addressing, touching, or alluding to school districts, to first responders, to street departments, etc. Again, take the voters out. You know what? We our own vote, the voters, the fiefdoms have put us in this fucking mess. Therefore, no more votes. Which infrastructure item do you think should be addressed at a macro level between the city and the county to improve any one of these areas that we've been talking about?
Well, I mean, again, if I was queen and there were no laws, I do think that the schools should be addressed. But legally, they're completely separate political subdivisions.
I don't want to
take that out of the equation. Streets. Honestly, I would start with that.
So you're telling me that a snow ice storm doesn't stop at a city line?
Yeah, imagine that.
Right.
But listen, there's plenty of municipalities in the county that don't have it together on that either. I am fortunate to live in a city that has always paid very close attention. We have a plan, a constant monitoring and repaving plan, and that's been in the city for, I don't know, long before I arrived. The fact that the city of St. Louis doesn't have an equally, I mean, it's just like anything else. We know that computers die after a certain period of time. We also know that streets die after a certain period of time. And the fact that the city of St. Louis or any other municipality doesn't have that in place, it's just part of, it's just part of your maintenance. It's like mowing your lawn as far as I'm concerned.
So educationally speaking, then, I want to go back to that through the lens of city, county, and this, and I know we're coming up on the end here. Within the county, there's some noise right now. There are a lot of parents and and people that are not happy with SSD, which is Special School District. However, SSD has done tremendous work for decades, helping kids in need. Do you see that as like if there was a carrot to be had on the end of a stick when it comes to education within the region through the lens of a city-county merger? What kind of impact do you think an SSD kind of larger umbrella have to help all of those IEPs and physically disabled and mentally disabled kids that live in the city that can't go to a charter school?
I think that's a great question, and I think that it is a game changer. I think of the people knocking doors, and just people that I already know that live on the county side that came from the city. They're not coming because of the school district. They're coming because of the IEPs. And when I talk about we need to have wraparound services, we need to do things to help educate folks that are struggling for whatever reason. SSD is a perfect example of doing that. And are they in financial crunch right now? Yeah, and it's an unfortunate yes. I don't honestly know the details of how it ended up getting to that point. I knocked the door of an SSD teacher just last week, and they moved from the city to the county when she was, I believe, pregnant with a child that had Down syndrome, and she was already an SSD teacher. And she said, I know that my kid's never going to get serviced here or in the city. And so I think that's a huge game changer. Honestly, I do. And the question, like everything, the question becomes money. Nobody wants to pay taxes, and we're already, people are struggling. As someone that has lived paycheck to paycheck, look, I started my car with a screwdriver for 6 months as a young single mom because I didn't have $150. Literally. So people are in that boat now, and it's not just low income and paycheck to paycheck people. Middle class folks are feeling it too. So that's the sticking point. And I get that people don't want to raise their taxes and just throw more money at, they feel that they're throwing money at problems that still don't get solved. And there's some truth to that. But again, we need to address kids with IEPs. We need to. And the city has just not been able to do that. They can't hire they can't even hire the staff.
Yeah. Let's close out here. I'm going to ask you a few fun questions to take us out the exit. District 4. Would you consider yourself a Richmond Heights? Like that's your crest, that's your high school, that's your place, or are you a St. Louisan?
I'm a St. Louisan. Look, I'm a U City girl. So I'm a U City girl, again, dropped out of high school, lived in Los Angeles for several years, came back in my early 20s because I wanted kids and I wanted to own my own home, neither of which I thought was going to happen in Los Angeles. So I consider myself a St. Louisan more than anything else. I always have,
So, and then let's just speculate here. Let's say that you advance and you go, game plan, what do you work on first?
Listen, next year's just going to be budget. We're in a super minority. I get that, okay? And is it a defensive game mostly? Yes, it is. In the Senate, although I was successful in the House with several issues or amendments, or, I worked very well with Republicans. There's a reason why a Republicans, Speaker appointed me to the Greitens investigation. And I think it was Harry Truman that said you can get a lot done if you're willing to not take credit for it. And that was my experience in the House, and I hope that to be my experience in the Senate as well, in that, there's actual compromise and actual changing of a bill, or there's just lipstick on a pig. And I still don't vote for the pigs, even with the lipstick. But that would be my hope, is to be able to address, those are small things. So people say, well, what are you going to focus on first? Well, okay, it's not going to be too, I'm not going to be able to go in and say, okay, we're going to change all the gun laws. That's just not, it's not realistic. But I think honestly next year, I don't think there's going to be a whole heck of a lot of policy going through. It's really the fight is going to be at the budget level. There's going to be some policy bills, obviously.
Yeah, because of the big, beautiful bill, the realities of that is going to matriculate, and then states are going to have to respond.
Right, and we're looking at what happened in 2008 during the financial crisis was I had a kid in Maplewood Richmond Heights schools who had cerebral palsy and was in a motorized wheelchair. So the state provides a motorized wheelchair. He's a Medicaid recipient, had mom working 2, maybe even 3 jobs. I mean, we're talking paycheck to paycheck, just struggling. And they gave him the motorized wheelchair, but they wouldn't pay for the battery. So it's basically, here, we're going to give you this very expensive brick, but a wheelchair without a battery for a kid with cerebral palsy is nothing. It's nothing. So that's what I think is really going to be the focus. The first focus is to do everything we can to ensure that those kids like that one was a classmate of my daughter's are not left with brick wheelchairs.
Last question, 2028, skip over all this other stuff, win, lose, draw, it doesn't matter. 2028, who do you want to see on the Democratic ticket at the top?
Probably Brashears.
Andy?
Yeah.
So you like that pragmatic middle guy?
Listen, you know what? My grandma, my mom, I was raised to believe you have to choose between being effective and being right, and I choose effective all the time.
Do you think he's got the personality that can withstand a national spotlight?
You never know. And honestly,
I like him. In full transparency, I like him. But again, I watch a different kind of news than the normal voter.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting question, though, because to talk about personality, listen, all of those rules seem to have just gone out the window under the Trump era. What is personality? What are we really looking for? Are we... what is the American public going to be looking for in 2028?
Let me ask you the flip side of that real quick, and then we're out of here. I too like Andy Beshear. I think he would. I think it would depend on how the debates go as to whether or not he can pull it off. On the far other side of the spectrum, or at least just from a popularity standpoint, do you think someone like an AOC could win?
I don't. I mean, an AOC might be able to win a primary, and I'm not like an anti-AOC person. I agree with a lot of her positions or policy proposals, but I don't know that the electorate is quite ready for that. I don't know that the electorate's ready for it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's somewhere. Who knows? I don't think the candidate has presented themselves yet. That's my take.
And let me add this though. It might be, again, just sort of spitballing. It might be that 2028 is the year that AOC can get elected, because by then the constituency, the United States voters might be so disgusted and overwhelmed by the Trump shenanigans that they might be willing to say, you know what, I'm going to go with this one.
Yeah, I think 2028. I think 2028 will look a lot like 2020 in so much that anything but, and then the additional factor is you do not have a cult of personality coming down the pipe that matches what Trump is on the Republican side. So they're going to lose that kind of again, cult of personality that motivates more people. So anyway, we could go on and on and on, but we're not going to do that. It's Friday. It's time to get out of here. It's St. Louis. I'm sure there's fried fish and a beer somewhere waiting. Miss Gina Mitten, thank you for joining.
Thank you. It was really enjoyable.
Good luck in your race, Senate District 4. I'll have a link to your campaign in the show notes. And if anything pops up, feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, everybody. Like, review, follow, share. Tell me you're joking. Out of here. Enjoy your weekday, weekend, whatever. Whenever you listen to this, whatever comes next, enjoy that. See ya.